Christmas Day has passed. Most of us have had our plate full of food and football. We've heard the story of the baby in the scratchy stall. We've heard the bells on Christmas Day and continued to sing the old familiar carols played. But the gospel reading for this morning lifts us off our seats and onto our toes. We move from the calm cradle to the 12-year-old Jesus, to the Jesus on the go, to the curious Jesus, to the Jesus growing in wisdom and years. Christians throughout the centuries have struggled with the biographical gap between Jesus' birth and his early adolescence. With the exception of this one episode, we know little about Jesus from birth until his adult ministry. We know much more about the childhood and early adult life of current politicians and celebrities. Some of the early Christians took great liberty to fill in where the gospel writers left off. In one story, in a so-called apocryphal gospel, Jesus is found in a creek bed exploring and making small birds out of the clay found in the creek banks. After carefully shaping the bird's beak and legs, Jesus held it up and the bird flew away. In another story, Jesus is found on a carpentry job with Joseph. Like many of our carpenters today, both of my grandfathers were carpenters, Joseph missed a measurement and cut a board too short for the job. He had forgotten, as carpenters say, to measure twice and cut once. Joseph was furious, but in comes supernatural Jesus to the rescue. The little boy solves the problem by touching the board and commanding it to stretch. Problem solved. Scholars today, in search of the historical Jesus, continue to ask questions about the missing history in Jesus' life. When was Jesus toilet trained? What was the reading level with Aramaic at age 6? What was his attendance record at the local synagogue in Nazareth? What kinds of games did he like to play with his schoolmates? The truth is, we do not need exaggerated filler stories to shore up our faith. The full picture of Jesus does not depend upon embellished stories with demonstrative miracles. In this story today, we get the greatest miracle of all. The miracle of Jesus' presence and engagement with the totality of earthly life, with all of its questions. Jesus is eager to be in God's house. He shows his impeccable Jewish credentials. He is interested in the teachers there and their dialogue. They found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. What a wonderful description of the people of God gathered together. Who knows whether or not Jesus turned globs of clay into living birds? Who knows knows whether or not he stretched out Joseph's 2x4s? Who knows whether or not Jesus was an early or late bloomer in physical development, whether he suffered from the aches and pains behind his knees of growing pains as a teenager? I suspect so. The greatest miracle of all is Jesus' full engagement with every aspect of earthly life. Every aspect. He does not bombast or lay down the law to the teachers in the temple. He enters into the dialogue and issues of the day. He grapples with the profound questions of utmost importance. He digs in with the deep questions of meaning and purpose. He tunes in to the condition of the teachers as an active listener. All this maturity at age 12. Later, Jesus would undergo greater and more intense questioning, temptation, and wrestling with matters of death and life. Later, Jesus became a walking spittoon, facing the cross as a consequence for the depth of his love for all people. But he was raised on the third day, unable to be pinned down by death. And because of this journey, Jesus is able to comfort us in our afflictions, to embrace us in our grief and sorrow, to laugh with us in our awkward moments, and to show to those who feel most distant the immediacy of his presence. So, you children in elementary school, remember that Jesus knows what it is like to learn to read and write and spell and get along on the playground. You teenagers, remember that Jesus understands your struggles to be accepted and loved. He really knows what it is also like to be disrespected. You young adults, remember that Jesus struggles with you in your job when you agonize over the proper parental decision-making, when you see life in its dark gray areas. You older adults, remember that Jesus, at an early age of 12, knew what it meant to sit down among the elders and listen to the stories that carry seasoned meaning. Yes, Christ Jesus is an amazing miracle in a different sort of way. His primary miracle is his powerful presence. God with us, God for us, God at work up close and on our behalf. His presence is with us now as we also enjoy the fellowship of others gathered in this temple. Here we celebrate his joyful presence. Here we ask the hard questions. Here we bask in Jesus, the holy wisdom